During my mother and brother's funeral, I looked at Maddie and saw her digging around in my brother's casket. I rushed over to her and said, "Maddie, no. They're working on making your uncle look nice. Let's make sure everyone sees how good he looks." When I said this, Maddie pointed towards the other side where I was. "You see, that man over there with the blue tie wants me to show this piece of paper to Mommy." Maddie held out a sheet of paper folded in quarters to me. I turned around to look, but no one was there. I opened the paper and looked through it curiously, and immediately after that, I ran out of the funeral hall with Maddie in my arms. I am Brittany, 30 years old, a single mother with a 4-year-old daughter. I lost my beloved husband in an accident when I was 5 months pregnant. When the police called me and told me about my husband's accident, my mind went blank and I could not move. On that day, my husband woke up at 6:30 a.m. as usual, ate breakfast I made for him as usual, said, "I'm off," to me and my baby with a smile as usual, and headed for work. It was an ordinary weekday morning. The funeral service was held without me being able to accept the reality of seeing my husband who passed away at the hospital. I did not speak or cry, but simply bowed my head to the attendees like a robot. My mother, Roslyn, and my brother, Steve, supported me during and after the funeral. I never had a father. My father died when I was still young, and my mother raised me and my brother by herself. My brother is 5 years older than me and was still in elementary school at the time. He would have loved to play with his friends when he came home from school, but he took over the housework for our mother and played with me so that I would not feel lonely. Seeing them, I began to want to help too, and while my mother and brother taught me housework, the three of us as a family worked together to make ends meet. When I started my full-time job, I started living on my own near my office. However, on weekends and holidays, would go home to my parents' house 2 stops away by train and have dinner with them. A few years later, I married the man I had been dating for a long time, got pregnant, and lived happily ever after. Until I received the news that my husband had passed away. My mother and brother, who had been by my side during my husband's funeral, were worried about me and asked me to stay with them after the funeral. I still could not accept his death and did not want to leave where I lived with him, so I looked at my stomach. A slightly bigger belly. A baby with my beloved husband. If I was going to give birth to and raise this child, it would surely be better to go back to my parents' house than to live here. Remembering the way my husband had been talking to my belly ever since I found out I was pregnant, and thinking that I, as the mother, had to be strong, I decided to look ahead and get on with my life. I decided to live with my parents, but there was something that worried me a little. It was my sister-in-law, Sherry. A few years ago, my brother married Sherry, who is 3 years younger than him, and now my mother, brother, and Sherry live at my mother's house. I visit my mother's house often, so I see my sister-in-law there from time to time.
Can you imagine making $10,000 a month just from YouTube, all from home? That's exactly what I did with Reddit Stories. No face, no voice. Check the link in the description if you're curious.
I have neither a good nor a bad impression of her, but she might not like the idea of me moving to her house with a child in my belly. I was worried about that, but my sister-in-law readily agreed to let me move in. So me, my mother, brother, and sister-in-law began living together at my mother's house, and with her support, I safely gave birth to a healthy baby. We decided on the name Maddie, which my husband and I had been thinking about before she was born. As I held Maddie, who was crying cheerfully, I get determined once again to raise this child well. Raising a child was quite hard, but with the help of my mother and brother, Maddie grew up healthily and turned 4 years old this year. My brother and his wife have no children. My sister-in-law seems to be incapable of having children, so my brother cannot hope for his own biological child. Therefore, my brother takes good care of my daughter. Saying things like, "I'll watch Maddie, why don't you go out somewhere with your friends?" He often took care of Maddie for me on days when he was off from work. Maddie seems to have had an imaginary friend since she turned 4 years old, and she sometimes talks to her in empty spaces. I often hear that small children can sometimes see spiritual things, so I wasn't that concerned about it. My mother and brother were also optimistic and laughed and said that as they grew older, such things would go away, but my sister-in-law, Sherry, apparently did not think so. "Hey, why don't you have that girl exorcised?" While saying this, she looked at Maddie with eyes as if she was looking at something creepy. She began to avoid Maddie, and when Maddie tried to touch my sister-in-law's belongings, she would sometimes yell at the 4-year-old, "Don't touch me." I wanted to complain to her, but I couldn't say anything strongly because I was the one who moved into the house and I didn't want to cause trouble for my mother and brother by getting on bad terms with her. Fortunately, Maddie didn't seem to mind and my sister-in-law never approached Maddie, so I decided to wait and see. Maddie started going to preschool and I started working at an office job. Thanks to the inheritance my husband left me, we had enough money to live on, but I had to make sure that Maddie would be able to choose when she started learning or going to college. I thought that no matter how much money we had, it would not be enough so that we could let Kana choose when she would eventually start learning or go to college. I talked to my mother and brother and they both agreed that I should work. I told the company that I had a daughter, and they agreed to let me work from morning to evening on weekdays while Maddie was at daycare. There was some concern that Maddie, who was talking to her imaginary friend more and more, would be bullied at daycare, but it seems that she is playing well with other friends at daycare as normal. At my new workplace, too, everyone was kind to me, and I was gradually learning my job and enjoying my days to the fullest. Then one day on a holiday, my brother said, "Why don't we sometimes go out together, taking Maddie?" My brother had taken Maddie to the park and had ice cream together on the way home, but he had never asked me to join them. I was a little surprised, but I had no reason to refuse, and when I looked at Maddie next to me, she was so ready to go. After a quick word to my mother in the kitchen, my brother drove us to the department store. We went to the department store and looked around the children's clothing and toys section. "Maddie is being a good girl, so I'll buy you a toy." Yay! Maddie wants this one. Maddie was so happy that she gave him a stuffed cat toy. "Steve, don't spoil Maddie too much, okay? Kids grow up and become adults soon, so I want to spoil her while I still can." The brother with the stuffed cat headed for the cash register. My brother had always bought Maddie toys. However, I never dreamed that the stuffed cat would be the last present my brother would ever give Maddie. After leaving the toy store, we went into a coffee shop in the department store. Maddie and I order a cake set and my brother orders coffee, and we close the menu. I looked at Maddie sitting next to me, smiling and happy, holding the stuffed cat that my brother had just bought her. I'm glad the three of us came here today, I thought, when suddenly my brother asked me something strange. Hey Brittany, have you noticed anything strange happening to you or Maddie lately? Anything strange? What's wrong, all of a sudden? Anything. Even the smallest thing. Have you ever noticed anything out of the ordinary? My brother's expression was so serious that I also tried to recall recent events. I can't think of anything in particular. As I answered that, the cake set and coffee I ordered were brought in. Maddie and I were eating the cake while saying, "It's delicious," but my brother was having coffee with a stern expression on his face the whole time. Is something wrong? When I asked this, my brother said, "No, it's nothing serious," and smiled for a moment before quickly returning to his grim expression. In the car on the way home, he said, "If anything unusual happens, I want you to tell me right away." I didn't understand what he was trying to say, but I said, "Okay," and kept his words in a corner of my mind. And the next day, this time my mother said the same line to me. "Brittany, how are you these days? Is there anything strange going on?" "What?" "Nothing." I questioned her and asked her if something was wrong, but she just shook her head and said, "No." After this, my brother and mother asked me one after another if there was anything unusual, and I answered, "No," every time, even though I thought it was odd that I couldn't think of anything. I would later regret not thinking deeper days after. A few days after my brother, Maddie, and I went to the coffee shop, tragedy struck. I had just finished work, picked up Maddie from daycare, put her in the car, and started the car engine. My phone, which I had set to silent mode, vibrated. I looked at the screen and saw my sister-in-law's name. I pressed the call button, thinking how unusual it is for my sister-in-law to call me. "Sherry? What's wrong?" "Brittany, I just got a call from the police. I heard that Steve and his mother passed away." My mind goes blank. This is the second time I've had this feeling. Somewhere in the back of my head, calm me down. As I hung up the phone, Maddie called out to me, stunned. "Mommy? Aren't we going home yet?" Not knowing what to say to my still young child, I forced the corners of my mouth to turn up, patted Maddie's head, and started the car engine. I wondered if I should take Maddie with me, but I had no one I knew I could leave her with, so we headed to the hospital together. My mother and brother were lying on beds. Beside them, my sister-in-law was crying with her face down. I went near the bed and looked at my mother and brother's faces. They had external injuries, but they looked as if they were just sleeping. "Are Grandma and Uncle asleep?" I could not hold back my tears as my young daughter said those words. I hugged Maddie, who was holding a stuffed cat, and I cried aloud. The next day, I served as a mourner in deep sorrow. Both my sister-in-law and I had lost two important family members at the same time, but as usual, she did not want to approach Maddie, and I felt disturbed by that, so there was really only minimal conversation between us. My sister-in-law was looking down the whole time, and halfway through the event, she said she was not feeling well and walked out of the venue. I knew how my sister-in-law felt, so I left her alone. Only those who have gone through the same experience can understand the grief of those who have lost a family member. I remember the faces of my mother and brother sleeping in their hospital beds. My husband passed away 5 years ago, and now my mother and brother have also left for heaven. Why are the important people close to me dying one after another? My family is now only Maddie. But it is the same for Maddie. I have to be strong. I'm her mother. With this in mind, I maintained myself by performing my duties as a mourner in an unassuming manner. During my mother and brother's funeral, I looked at Maddie and saw her digging around in my brother's casket. I rushed over to her and said, "Maddie, no. They're working on making your uncle look nice. Let's make sure everyone sees how good he looks." When I said this, Maddie pointed towards the other side where I was. "You see, that man over there with the blue tie wants me to show this piece of paper to Mommy." Maddie held out a sheet of paper folded in quarters to me. I turned around to look, but no one was there. I opened the paper and looked through it curiously, and immediately after that, I ran out of the funeral hall with Maddie in my arms. The first sentence, written in his brother's handwriting, was, "The entire inheritance will be given to Maddie." The problem was what followed, which was a rambling description of my sister-in-law's misdeeds. She was after my husband's inheritance and had requested me to disappear from the world through the dark web of the internet. The fact that this paper, written by my brother, is in my brother's coffin suggests that my sister-in-law tried to dispose of this paper by burning it along with my brother. If that is the case, does that not mean that my mother and brother died because of my sister-in-law's crime? In other words, she tried to take my husband's inheritance by making me a deceased person, but my brother and mother found out about it, and when questioned, my sister-in-law had no choice but to make my brother and mother deceased. She then tried to keep the inheritance for herself, but she found my brother's will, which contained the inheritance and my sister-in-law's misdeeds, and hid it in the coffin with my brother to destroy the evidence. When I figured this out, my deep grief over the loss of my mother and brother instantly turned to hatred for my sister-in-law. Forcing myself to suppress the raging emotions inside me, I contacted my sister-in-law's workplace and the police. The reason I contacted my sister-in-law's employer was because my brother's will stated that my sister-in-law was going to embezzle company money. My sister-in-law had asked them to make me deceased, but of course the fee was very expensive. My brother is a regular office worker and my sister-in-law works part-time 3 days a week, and they didn't have that much money. So she planned to use her company's money to make me deceased. Her company took immediate action and fortunately I was able to stop her before she embezzled the money, for which they thanked me. As for my sister-in-law, I have not seen her since she left the funeral home in the middle of the funeral. My sister-in-law's personal belongings remain in the house and there is not a single sign that she has returned. I am sure she is in such a bad situation that she can't come back to get her belongings. The police are after her and she probably couldn't pay the money to the scary people, so she must be in danger. When I think of my mother's and brother's faces, I feel a fierce anger toward my sister-in-law, but at the same time, I feel sorry for my mother and brother. My mother and brother have gone to heaven instead of me. My sister-in-law was trying to take my life. I wish I could find my sister-in-law and make her suffer the same as my mother and brother. But I am sure that neither my mother nor my brother would want that. And I can't let Maddie be alone. No matter how much I hate someone, I must put my daughter's happiness first. I suddenly remembered what Maddie had said at the funeral home. The man with the blue tie over there is telling me to show this paper to Mommy. Maddie pointed to the place where no one was there. The blue tie, it was probably the one I had given to my husband as a gift before he died. On the morning of the day he died, he wore that blue tie and left the house with a smile on his face. I guess he is still watching over Maddie and me. A few days later, I took Maddie to visit my husband's grave. I put a bouquet of flowers and my husband's favorite hamburger at the grave, which I bought on the way here, and joined hands with Maddie to thank my husband. Let's eat the hamburger with Daddy. I gave Maddie half of the hamburger, which was still slightly warm. It's delicious. Daddy says it's good too. What? Daddy says it's good. The man with the blue tie was Daddy. When Mommy was praying with her eyes closed, Daddy was eating a hamburger too. I couldn't help but laugh when I heard that. My husband loved hamburgers so much that he would eat them every day, and whenever he saw a hamburger place, even on a date, he would often say, "Just one, and buy one." It would have been a touching scene if it were true, as my daughter met her late father and I realized that my husband was here, but I couldn't stop laughing as I imagined him eating a hamburger even though he was a ghost. From now on, I'll bring you a hamburger every so often with Maddie.